It might be a beautiful place, but sometimes beauty hides dark secrets, and when the shadows of the Pacific Northwest stretch long, anything is possible. Olympic National Park and Gifford Pinchot National Forest, two lush, untamed stretches of wild land, are more than just picturesque destinations for hikers and explorers. Beneath the towering trees, through thick fog, and across rugged terrain, there are those who claim they've seen things no one can explain, creatures they can't name, and a government intent on keeping it all from the public. Two stories, eerily similar in their strangeness, yet separate in time and place, uncover something surprising. Nothing about this wilderness is as it seems. Step into the abyss and welcome to Weird Encounters, a place where the ordinary fades into shadow and the unexplainable comes alive. Make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and join our ever-growing community of the curious. Your support is the lifeblood that keeps this channel alive. Now, prepare yourself, for what you're about to witness is not for the faint of heart. I've been racking my brain about whether to share this, but it's been eating at me for a good while. I once took part in a volunteer search and rescue operation out in Olympic National Park, Washington State. This was in mid-November, right around the time you start feeling that damp cold settle in for the winter. I'm emailing you now because my gut keeps telling me something's off, and I don't trust official channels to give the full story. The Park Service, maybe even more than that, some government arm, I guess, seems eager to brush it all under the rug. So here's how it started. A park ranger named, actually, I'll just call him Ranger M for privacy, went missing while doing a routine patrol near the Bogachiel Peak area. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal at first. These guys are out in the wilderness constantly, and folks sometimes lose radio contact for a day or two if they venture into the deeper backcountry. But after 48 hours, people started getting nervous. Colleagues said he was usually good about daily check-ins, especially with the weather turning sour. I'm on a local volunteer list for the search and rescue squad, so I got the call. We had about 20 folks, SAR volunteers, a few park employees, and a smattering of local law enforcement, divided into smaller search teams. The rumor was that they'd also looped in a few guys from Joint Base Lewis McChord, but I only spotted a couple of unmarked vehicles near the ranger station and some men who looked more specialized than your everyday volunteer. I didn't see patches or insignias. They had that kind of stiff, no-nonsense posture you usually associate with military. Anyway, my group of 5 was assigned to check some lesser-used trails near the Hoh River Valley. We picked that route because it's known for quick-rising streams and tricky footbridges, places a person might have gotten stranded or taken a bad spill. It was cold, damp, everything coated with moss the way it usually is in that rainforest corridor. The walkie chatter among the teams was mostly about normal stuff at first, downed trees, bear scat, that sort of thing. But as we pressed further up along an unofficial spur trail that heads toward the Bailey Range, we started noticing old footprints, really large footprints, and I don't think they were from normal hikers. They seemed too wide, almost like something was dragging the front edge of the foot. Honestly, I assumed it was a bear sliding around in the mud, but it had this weird shape to it that I couldn't quite place. We spent the better part of the day picking our way through underbrush, trying not to twist an ankle on wet logs. One of our group members, an older guy who's done SR for years, commented that the forest was quieter than usual. Fewer bird calls, not as many squirrels or chipmunks scurrying around. Sometimes it's just how it goes, but he said it gave him an uneasy feeling, like something was out there, maybe a big predator. Late in the afternoon, we got a call on the radio that another team had found something near the Bogachiel River forks, some kind of large bones. No sign of the ranger, but definitely a large skull. Well, we half-joked that maybe they'd found the Bigfoot skeleton. The radio silence that followed was eerie. It wasn't a light-hearted conversation. Normally, there would have been some banter. An hour later, we met up with them. They'd set out fluorescent markers in a tight perimeter around a small rock overhang that was maybe 50 yards off the main trail, hidden by heavy brush. Turned out, they'd discovered more than one skull. They had found two large skulls, like something that might be in a museum exhibit. If I had to guess, they were nearly twice the size of an average human skull, though shaped similarly. No elongated snout like a bear or canine. Both had partial jaws attached, and the teeth they looked almost human, but with canines that were slightly too long. Our immediate reaction was that they must be old indigenous remains, or an animal with a bizarre deformity. I know, it sounds insane, but the energy around that site was suffocating. We were all spooked. Our team lead radioed the finding in, and after some static-laden back and forth, we were instructed to hold the area. There was no mention of Ranger M in that exchange, which seemed odd. European and American explorers and traders logged multiple alleged man-eating incidents along the Pacific Northwest coast, citing a mysterious cannibalistic tribe at the heart of local lore. Yet, when the skulls were finally examined, they appeared to not be that old, leaving everyone uncertain as to their true origin. Weird part is, after some time, some official-looking folks showed. Mind you, we were deep in the park. They wore dark green jackets, no name tags that I could see, and one older guy who had a distinct East Coast accent kept telling us we'd done our job and should move along. Just like that. He didn't say, thanks. Didn't say, this is huge. Just told us to go home. One of our group kept politely asking if they were going to test the remains, contact local tribal authorities, that sort of thing. The older official sort of nodded, but his eyes were elsewhere, scanning the trees. Then one of the others abruptly mentioned they needed confidentiality because of an ongoing investigation. No further explanation. They loaded those skulls into some heavy-duty containers and took off. We never saw them again. That was the first sign something bigger was going on. The next sign came when we regrouped at the Kino Ranger Station the next morning. We expected a briefing on Ranger M's disappearance, an update on the remains, or at least a next step plan. Instead, the higher-ups told us the search was called off due to weather conditions and safety. There was a huge front blowing in, yes, but calling off a search for one of their own that quickly is not normal. They said they'd reach out if we were needed again. A few of us pressed for details, but they just repeated the same lines about danger, liability, and how they had a special operations team coming in. That's when it hit me. We were being pushed out. They didn't want us snooping. We never got official word on whether Ranger M was found, dead, or alive. Talk among the volunteers was that some personal effects, maybe a uniform patch or a name badge, were found near that rock overhang. But nobody would confirm that on record. One volunteer claimed he overheard radio chatter that a battered, unrecognizable body was pulled from the area around Bogachil Peak 2 days later, but I can't prove that. All I know is that my phone calls to the ranger station have been going straight to voicemail, and the few times I got someone on the line, they claimed they had no idea what I was talking about. It's like Ranger M never existed, or his case has become taboo to discuss. Now, here's what's been bugging me. I've lived in the general region of western Washington my whole life, and I remember my grandfather, a retired logger from Forks, telling stories about giants in the woods. He'd say that sometimes, during the darkest nights, you'd hear these bone-rattling howls echoing through the forest, and occasionally, loggers would find footprints too large to be from any known wildlife. He believed the government systematically covered up evidence of giant skeletons in the area to protect logging interests or something along those lines. I used to roll my eyes at that, thinking he'd just had one too many campfire whiskeys. But now I'm starting to wonder if there's a shred of truth to those tales. Because honest to goodness, those skulls looked unnervingly human, albeit on a giant scale. And that hush-up reaction from whoever took them away? It was so immediate, so matter-of-fact, that I'm convinced there's something more to it. I also heard a rumor, likely just local chatter, that there's an underground facility somewhere near Mount Storm King, connected by old Cold War-era bunkers. Some folks claim the government uses it to store classified specimens, including cryptid remains or even UFO debris. I have zero proof, but it's not the first time I've heard about hidden facilities in or around national parks. If there really is something out there, giant or otherwise, maybe that's where they'd send it. All I know is a well-respected park ranger is missing under bizarre circumstances, and I have a sinking feeling the truth isn't going to make it out to the public in any official capacity. Maybe Ranger M stumbled upon one of those remains himself and got on the wrong side of something beyond normal understanding, or was a victim of something bigger prowling those old growth forests. I'm sharing this with you and your YouTube channel because you're known to give these kinds of experiences some airtime without dismissing them outright. If there's a cover-up afoot, it won't be the first time we've seen that sort of thing with unusual discoveries in national parks. Have you come across anything similar? I'm not looking for fame or a fight with the authorities. I just think people deserve to know what's really going on out there, even if it's only to be cautious or to keep an eye out for themselves. I've rehashed this story a dozen times in my mind, and it still doesn't all line up in a nice, tidy package. But that's what I saw. That's what happened. And now I'm caught between wanting to forget it ever happened and needing to get it off my chest. Let me know if you want more details, and I'll try to fill in the gaps as best I can. So, there it sits, tucked away between the moss-covered trunks and the whispering breeze, a tale of strange shapes slipping through the firs, and of an official silence that perhaps speaks louder than any explanation. If the footprints are real, if the bodies were recovered, what else might still be out there in that deep green wilderness? Maybe the only way to know for sure is to set foot on those same hidden trails, though one wonders what you might find when the daylight fades. I'm not even sure how to begin, but I've been pacing for days trying to figure out if I should email you at all. Something happened during my time in Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. This was years ago, but it's like it's etched in my head. The images, the sensations, even the tension in the air. I haven't told many people because either they think it's a tall tale or, worse, they give me that polite nod that says they don't believe a single word. But I need to put it all out there. I first visited the area in the summer of 1992, tagging along with a group of older friends who were real outdoorsy types. I remember it was mid-July because we had that streak of uncharacteristically sunny days right after the 4th. We set up near Council Lake, just off Forest Road 23. The plan was simple enough: do some fishing, maybe hike around a bit, and definitely not stay tethered to any itinerary. We were just there to wander. On our second evening, we'd been winding down, picking at the leftover hot dogs from lunch, when someone mentioned feeling like we were being watched. I can't say who said it first because it was more a shared vibe, like the forest had eyes. We had that sense of collective unease, but nobody admitted it outright. Then, while walking to rinse out a pan in the lake, I thought I saw a figure moving at the tree line. At the time, I passed it off as my eyes playing tricks in the twilight. But the silhouette, tall, definitely taller than a normal man, just seemed to slip behind the trunk of a huge Douglas fir, so quietly I wasn't sure if it was even real. Over the next few days, random bits of strangeness piled up. Animal sounds suddenly going quiet, footsteps on pine needles, but never a visible person. A friend said they glimpsed a shape crossing the forest floor around dusk, describing it as a massive humanoid, though no one pressed for details, probably out of fear of ridicule. I recall specifically overhearing them talk about the length of its arms, how they swung oddly low. But the rest of us tried to laugh it off. Maybe we were spooking each other out. Or maybe it was all those talk radio shows about Bigfoot that used to run late at night. Anyway, on our last morning, one of us, a guy I'll call Mark, woke me up in a panic, saying we needed to break camp. He had gone to gather some fallen branches for the fire pit before sunrise and discovered enormous footprints in a patch of soft soil by the lakeshore. He was so shaken he refused to go back. None of us questioned him too hard, seeing the actual size of those prints, roughly 18 inches long, spaced in a stride bigger than any I'd seen, was enough to kill our appetite for adventure. We packed up quickly, and that was that. But it stuck with me. Fast forward to 2001. I was back in the region, helping a local volunteer group with a reforestation project near Mount Adams. We'd spend long days planting saplings and clearing trails of debris left behind by storms. There were occasional nights we stayed in a shared bunkhouse near Trout Lake. On one of those nights, a Forest Service employee, who was typically tight-lipped, admitted that they'd taken reports of large, unidentified bipeds more seriously than the public realizes. The rumor was there had been official investigations stretching back decades, not just by local rangers, but also by some hush-hush branch of the government. They said something about maintaining order and protecting the region's interests. I remember those exact phrases because it sounded too formal for casual conversation. It was implied that certain areas were off-limits to regular folks for reasons that never made it into public statements. Later, I heard an even stranger account linked to the aftermath of the Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980. This came from a longtime local who swore he saw the military carrying out large, hairy bodies alongside the typical rescue operations. He claimed no official mention was ever made, but that word spread among loggers, emergency crews, and local authorities. According to him, these creatures were bipedal humanoids and looked charred from the pyroclastic flows. Another volunteer who overheard the conversation just shook their head and walked away. It was as if they'd heard it all before and didn't want any part in confirming or denying it. In the years since, I've started paying more attention to every rumor, every snippet of conversation from hikers or rangers who talk quietly at local diners. I've met a couple of investigators who say the government definitely has a hand in suppressing certain sightings, particularly in prime hiking areas like the ones around Mount Adams, Goat Rock's Wilderness, and even up near the edge of the Yakima Reservation. They say it's about avoiding panic, or maybe preserving the forest's image for tourism, or some bigger reason altogether. It's never consistent, but always seems to circle back to not wanting these stories to go public. One time, I stumbled upon some old newspaper clippings that mentioned missing persons from that region whose cases were never resolved. Usually, the official stance is that they fell off a cliff or got lost, but a retired policeman claimed there'd been footprints found near at least one of the sites that didn't match any known animal. He suggested that search and rescue teams are instructed not to mention anomalies in their official reports. And I did see, with my own eyes, one such official form from the late 80s, with a section blacked out. I keep asking myself, what if there really are large humanoid creatures roaming these forests? And if so, why such a tight lid on it? Over the years, I've heard everything from potential government interest in studying them quietly, to theories about preserving a relic population of undiscovered primates, to more wild speculations involving undisclosed experiments. One old friend even mentioned something about interdimensional hotspots, pointing to the weird light phenomena occasionally reported near Mount Adams. I'm not saying I buy into every theory, but it's bizarre how many puzzle pieces seem to fit together once you start looking. The strangest part might be how quickly certain official agencies respond if you file the wrong kind of report. I heard about a family who claimed to see two large, upright figures rummaging through trash bins near a campground, and they actually called the local sheriff. The very next day, a group of men in unmarked vehicles showed up at the family's home to ask questions. The mother told me, much later, she got the impression they weren't local law enforcement because they flashed badges she didn't recognize. She was too scared to push the issue. I guess that's why so few people talk. There's an underlying sense that if you say too much, someone will come around asking you to stop. I wish I had conclusive proof, but all I have is a patchwork of sightings, footprints, and cryptic statements from people who arguably know more than they let on. Every time I go back, I get this feeling like the forest is layered in watchers, some that we know, some that we can't quite name. Anyway, I appreciate you letting me spill my guts. Your YouTube channel is one of the few places I feel might actually listen without automatically labeling me a crank. If any of your viewers have similar experiences in Gifford Pinchot or anywhere else in the Pacific Northwest, I'd love to hear about them. Maybe one day all these pieces will form a clearer picture, but for now, the real truth seems buried under a thick canopy of secrets and shadowy hands pulling strings. So, there it sits, tucked away between the moss-covered trunks and the whispering breeze, a tale of strange shapes slipping through the firs, and of an official silence that perhaps speaks louder than any explanation. If the footprints are real, if the bodies were recovered, what else might still be out there in that deep green wilderness? Maybe the only way to know for sure is to set foot on those same hidden trails, though one wonders what you might find when the daylight fades. In the misty edges of the Pacific Northwest, where the tides ebb and flow across rocky shores and the forests grow tall and thick with secrets, something stirs. One man, reluctant to speak for decades, now breaks his silence about what he saw, and perhaps more chilling, what he found. I've been wrestling with how best to put all of this into words, especially since some of these events happened so long ago. But the memories keep surfacing, and with all the stories I've seen on your YouTube channel, I decided it was time to share mine. There are two main encounters I want to talk about, one on Lummy Island in 1974 and the other near Lake Whatcom in 1981. I'm also going to mention some odd discoveries my family and I stumbled upon over the years, which I think tie into the overall mystery. My first real brush with something I can only label as Sasquatch took place in the late summer of 1974. I was 17 at the time. We had a small family cabin on the eastern side of Lummy Island, not too far from where the ferry unloads, but up in the wooded hills. I used to love wandering those old deer trails in the afternoon, especially around the giant cedar stands, because it always felt ancient, like stepping back in time. My grandparents often mentioned the local Lummy tribal legends about wild men in the forests, but I never took it too seriously. That was until late August. I remember it was close to dusk. I had been out gathering kindling for a bonfire and was heading back. The light was fading, turning everything golden, and there was this sudden hush that dropped over the woods. No birds, no wind, just an eerie stillness that made me stop in my tracks. All at once, I caught a glimpse of movement about 50 yards away, something tall and dark stepping between two cedar trunks. I thought maybe a bear, but it stood upright, definitely on two legs, with broad shoulders and an odd gait. Part of me wanted to yell out, but my throat went bone dry. This thing paused, and I got the feeling it was looking right at me, even though I couldn't clearly see its face. I was too scared to move. Then, as quick as it appeared, it slipped behind the trees and vanished. For a few moments, I couldn't tell if my eyes were playing tricks. But then, I heard a low, rumbling sound that resonated in my chest, almost like a deep growl or moan. It wasn't a sound I'd ever heard from any typical wildlife on Lummy, and I'd grown up out there. I found myself slowly backing away, not wanting to turn my back. When I finally made it down the path to the cabin, I tried to explain it to my dad. He looked unsettled but tried to reassure me it could have been a weird angle of light or a black bear standing on its hind legs. I knew that wasn't right. The next morning we noticed footprints, large depressions in the soft moss. They didn't have a sharp outline like what you see in plaster cast photos, but the size was undeniable. a stride too big for a normal person, each print maybe around 15 or 16 inches, with a vague shape of toes. My grandfather just nodded thoughtfully and mentioned that these forests have their own guardians. He also admitted something about hearing a similar growl years earlier, but never getting a glimpse like I did. Not long after that incident, I heard whispers among some of the older islanders about bizarre remains found on the southern tip of Lummy, huge human-like skulls that folks said didn't look quite right, or at least too large to be normal. Supposedly, some fishermen discovered them partially buried in mud during a super low tide. One rumor even claimed they turned them over to a local official, and then they disappeared without a trace. I never got the full story, but it lined up with other strange tales of oversized bones being unearthed around the San Juan Islands. People speculated they could be ancient native burial sites, or maybe something else. I sometimes wonder if those bones had anything to do with what I encountered in the woods that evening. Fast forward to 1981, and I was 24, living in Bellingham and working odd jobs. On a whim, I took an evening drive out near Lake Whatcom, where I heard there was a new logging road under construction. I wasn't exactly supposed to be there, but curiosity got the best of me. The area was quiet, thick with second-growth forest that somehow felt older than it really was. The sun had just set behind the mountains, leaving a soft light over the lake. I parked my truck off a side spur and started walking to see if the new road connected to some old trail. That's when I noticed an unsettling smell. It was pungent, like rotten fish and damp fur. I'll never forget it. Then, a cluster of ferns next to a downed log rustled. In a split second, I saw a tall, dark figure stand up from behind the log. It was maybe 30 feet away. My heart jumped into my throat because it was massive, at least 7 feet tall if not more. Even from that distance, I could tell the shoulders were broad and it was covered in what looked like dark brown hair. Instinct kicked in, and I thought about running back to the truck, but I was too shocked to move. Then that figure pivoted, like it was aware of me but wasn't exactly afraid, and in 2 strides, it slipped down a small ravine out of sight. There was a series of cracking branches, and then nothing. Dead silence again. I know what bears look like on their hind legs, and I'm telling you this wasn't one of them. The shape, the posture, the presence, everything about it screamed something else. The local rumors at the time were that logging crews sometimes found odd shelters made of interwoven branches, almost like a crude nest, deep in unlogged sections. And more talk about unusual bone discoveries, large femurs that didn't align with normal human anatomy, smaller elongated skulls that someone once claimed were non-human. Though any official mention of these finds got buried, some say by the state archaeologists or by the logging companies themselves. It's hard to separate truth from tall tales, but if there's one region where such secrets could remain hidden, it's this remote corner of Washington. Those 2 encounters, 1974 on Lummy Island and 1981 near Lake Whatcom, were enough to make me consider that the native legends aren't just stories. The stories about guardian spirits, watchers of the woods, or even a tribe of undiscovered forest dwellers start sounding a lot more plausible when you're staring straight at something you can't explain. I've spent a good portion of my life reading up on everything from Sasquatch lore to the possibility of ancient giants or unknown hominids. And each time I circle back, I find more references to large skeletal remains quietly vanishing into locked boxes in museum basements or private collections. I don't know what else to call these creatures. Some stick to calling them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. Others claim they're spirits or shapeshifters connected to the land. All I know is I experienced something real, something that left footprints in the moss and moved through the forest with intelligence and stealth. I don't share this story to convince anyone, but more to let people know if they've seen something similar, they're not alone. Maybe someday, all those rumored artifacts, like the oversized skulls or odd bones, will come out in the open and piece the puzzle together. Until then, I can't help but think there's far more to these forests than most folks realize. Strange footprints in the twilight, hulking figures that vanish without a trace, and whispered accounts of giant skulls whisked away. Are these the relics of folklore, or a frightening glimpse at a reality just beyond our comfortable edge? While you decide, let me tell you about another such account. An unsettling journey through the mists of Mount Rainier National Park, where unanswered questions hover like the morning fog, and an eyewitness can't quite shake that feeling that someone, somewhere, knows a whole lot more than they're letting on. They say that there might be some government involvement. I was a teenager back in the summer of 1989. My older cousin and I had planned a trip to Mount Rainier National Park for a few days of fishing and exploring. We'd spent countless weekends in those woods, usually near the Nisqually River or around Moich Lake, so it wasn't unusual for us to venture off trail. We were pretty familiar with the park boundaries and had a certain confidence that maybe, in hindsight, was a bit naive. That particular summer, there had been whispers about strange things going on, animal carcasses found in weird conditions, unusual howling noises at night. But you know how rumors pass around small communities, especially near national parks that have their share of mysterious lore. Anyway, on the second night of our camping trip, we decided to stay near a spot that wasn't entirely legal for overnight camping. It was somewhat off-limits, if I recall, but we'd discovered a clearing that we loved, and it seemed perfect to watch the sunset with a wide open sky. That night, right after midnight, we both heard these low guttural sounds, like a cross between a moan and a growl, coming from somewhere behind the thick stand of Douglas firs. It immediately struck us as odd because we'd done enough hiking and hunting to know what bears and cougars typically sound like. This was different. Honestly, it made my stomach churn. My cousin kind of dismissed it at first, saying it was probably just an animal fighting or calling out. But about an hour later, the strangest part happened. We heard what I can only describe as two heavy footsteps or thumps, almost like boulders being dropped into soft ground. Then, silence, longer than I expected. Right after that, the air seemed to go still, like everything else shut up at once. No insects, no rustling leaves, just a dead quiet you could practically taste. We didn't sleep much that night. When morning came, we found these large impressions in the soft soil around the perimeter of our campsite. They looked like enormous footprints, bare footprints. They were far larger than even the biggest person I'd ever encountered, and the stride between them was shockingly wide. My cousin measured it roughly with a piece of rope, and we were left scratching our heads about what kind of creature could possibly have that kind of gait. We talked to a park ranger stationed at the Carbon River entrance later that day, indirectly mentioning the footprints. The ranger simply changed the subject, like he didn't want us discussing it in front of the other visitors. We tried pressing him a bit, but he shut us down with a forced laugh, acted like it was no big deal, and shifted the conversation to hiking safety tips. It was obvious something about our story unsettled him. That same afternoon, we decided to keep exploring further north, just outside the official boundaries near the Clearwater Wilderness region. We figured maybe we'd spot additional prints or come across some clue as to what we heard and found. To our surprise, we did find more footprints, though not as clear as the ones at our camp, and fresh broken branches about 9 feet off the ground in multiple spots, like something extraordinarily tall had just plowed right through. We also picked up a foul stench that reminded me of rotten eggs mixed with wet dog, although it lingered only a moment. Here's where it gets interesting. A black SUV, no official park or government insignias that we could see, pulled up when we were on our way back. It stopped near the side of the gravel road leading out of the wilderness area. Two men stepped out. One wore a dark suit and the other was in a more casual outfit, but sporting the same black baseball cap. They asked if we were camping or just passing through. My cousin, a little spooked by then, mentioned we'd seen a strange footprint. They gave each other a look, subtle, but I caught it. The guy in the suit said something about not wandering off designated trails and how the region was prone to bear activity. Then he strongly suggested we take a more established route out of the park next time. It felt more like an order than a suggestion. It was odd enough that we talked about it the entire drive home. About a week later, my cousin claimed he got a call from someone he didn't recognize. A woman speaking calmly, asking if he'd told anyone else about what we found and reminding him of park regulations and how misinformation could be detrimental to tourism. He said she never identified herself, only that she was calling on behalf of a park management team. We never made an official report with the National Park Service or anything. Frankly, we both felt it'd be pointless or worse, could get us into trouble. But there was no doubt in our minds that we stumbled on something important enough for someone to keep track of us. A year or so went by, and whenever I'd visit that corner of the park, I kept noticing the same black SUV, though it might have been a coincidence. But I'll say this. Once you see something that doesn't add up in a place you thought you knew so well, it's like your eyes never stop scanning. I've tried asking a few people in the area if they'd heard about big footprints or official hush-hush business, and I'd get the same reaction. Immediate dismissal or a suspicious shift in conversation, like they wanted to pretend we hadn't brought it up. By the mid-90s, I was hearing rumors about how certain park rangers weren't just rangers, that they might be involved with hush operations regarding wildlife management or cryptid containment, though no one used the word Bigfoot directly. It sounded outlandish at the time, but I'd already seen enough to know something was being carefully swept under the rug. More recently, I stumbled on a few older reports about the Army Corps of Engineers back in the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, how they supposedly removed large, unidentifiable remains from the blast zone under the cover of hazard cleanup. Some folks swore up and down that the remains weren't human, but that's where the official story ends. It's the same pattern of secrecy that we encountered on a smaller scale, and it makes me wonder just how many of these sightings are quietly resolved so the public never knows. So, I'm telling you now, whatever is out in those woods, it's real. I can't prove it. I never snapped any photos, and the footprints we found have long since eroded. But I've talked to enough people over the years to know we're hardly the only ones who've stumbled upon something big, hairy, and very much alive up there. And if you try to push for answers, you might just get a visit from a couple of stern-faced guys in a nondescript vehicle who'll politely tell you to keep your nose out of park matters. I hope sharing this helps someone else come forward. I'm convinced the government, whether it's the Park Service or a deeper agency, knows more about these sightings than they let on. Maybe it's about preserving wilderness illusions, or maybe something else entirely. Regardless, I appreciate you letting me get this off my chest. There are stories that slip through the cracks of our everyday chatter, tales whispered in hushed tones and shared only under the safety of darkness. You never quite expect they'll happen to you until one day, in the quiet hush of a wide-open stretch of land, something shows up that refuses to be ignored. Let me set the stage for you. This happened in the San Luis Valley in southern Colorado, where Colorado, New Mexico, and the horizon all seemed to blur. It was late September 2019, right before those early frosts start to settle in. I remember the time well because I was in town helping a friend move some of his equipment from an abandoned family farm near Hooper. The place is known for sightings, UFO sightings, cryptid sightings, cattle mutilations, you name it. I've been hearing stories since I was a teenager, and to be frank, they always rolled off me like bedtime stories. But I can't quite do that anymore. We were winding down a long day, hauling stuff in and out, making multiple trips along County Road 17. Honestly, the first day was uneventful. Just a big open sky, the dust kicking up behind the truck tires. That night, we heard coyotes, which was normal, but there was this weird echo that followed them. Almost like there was a second pack howling back, but in a deeper register. Guttural, if that makes sense. It didn't rattle me then. I just thought maybe it was the echo across the valley or something. The second night was when the thing started to feel wrong. My friend's old farmhouse is half collapsed, and we were using flashlights to poke around for anything salvageable. No electricity out there. Sometime around 10 p.m., I got this overwhelming feeling that I was being watched, like that prickly feeling on the back of your neck. I turned around, and across the field, I spotted movement. It was low to the ground, but taller than a coyote. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it's just a deer. They come down from the Rio Grande National Forest sometimes. But the shape wasn't right. It was more elongated with a hunched back. I remember thinking, could it be a bear, rummaging around for scraps? I almost hoped it was, but there was something off about how it moved. Too smooth, almost liquid. No bobbing up and down. It looked like it was gliding rather than walking. I thought it was my imagination at first. I told my friend, "Hey, I think there's some critter out here." He didn't say much, but we both decided it was best to head back to the truck. On our third trip, we were about to load one last piece of furniture when we heard this knocking sound, like a thick branch hitting an old fence post. But there were no trees in that immediate area, just scrub and open fields. I froze because I'd read enough weird stories about the valley to know wood knocks sometimes get associated with Bigfoot sightings. It seemed ridiculous to me, yet there we were, hearing a thump, thump, thump out in the dark. I don't think I've ever felt such an urge to run. My friend muttered something about the Watchers. He has family ties to the region, and they talk about Watchers in hushed voices. No one's ever explained who or what they are, only that they've been around longer than memory. Now, here's a tangent that might be relevant. My friend's father was apparently part of a hush-hush government surveying team in the early 80s. You know how the stories go. He'd come home from the Crestone area, talking about how the government was supposedly studying strange aerial phenomena. Something about magnetic anomalies off the charts near the Great Sand Dunes. All I know is that he used to say, "There are places people aren't meant to go poking around, so maybe this farmland is near one of those spots." We decided to wrap up for the night. The next morning, I went back alone. I was finishing up the last bits of the move. You might think that was crazy, but I was determined to get it all done. The day was clear, sky so blue, it felt unreal. About midday, I heard this low hum. It was so faint, I almost mistook it for a plane overhead, but there was nothing in the sky. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then silence, followed by two large booms in the distance, like sonic booms. But not from any jet that I saw. It reminded me of that weird phenomenon people sometimes call skyquakes. Later, as I was heading back to the truck with the final load, a car pulled up along the road. An older man rolled down his window. He didn't introduce himself, just asked if I saw anything unusual the night before. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. He gave me this look, hard to describe, maybe disappointment or resignation, and he said, "We all see them eventually. Then he drove off. I spent a long time trying to figure out who he was. Rancher? Local caretaker? Or someone else entirely? He wore no uniform, and the SUV had no plates that I could see, which was bizarre. I called my friend about it, but he wasn't surprised. He just said, "Happens sometimes," as if that explained everything. That night, I left the farm and drove back toward Alamosa. The sun was nearly set, and you know that time of day, everything's got a strange glow. As I looked in my rearview mirror, I swear I saw a figure standing near the side of the road. Tall, too tall for a normal person, with a narrow, elongated head. It was just standing there, not moving. I tried to rationalize that it might be a telephone pole or something. But telephone poles don't vanish the moment you blink. And it did. Just gone. I've heard of so many cryptid and paranormal accounts in the San Luis Valley, UFO sightings, weird lights in the sky, water disappearing from stock tanks without explanation, and even rumored government vehicles lurking around. I used to brush them off as local legends. But now, it's like I have more questions than answers. I can't shake this feeling that something old and strange roams this valley, and whatever it is, it's comfortable enough out there to show up to people who aren't even trying to see it. I think the more people talk about this, the less power these entities, or whatever they are, have to stay in the shadows. I hope this spurs some real conversation about what's lurking in the San Luis Valley. And so, amid the quiet expanse of an all-too-familiar valley, we're left to wonder what really walks between the rows of abandoned farms and the muted highways at dusk. It's a tale that beckons us to look a little closer, to keep our eyes wide open, if we dare, and to ask ourselves how many mysteries we pass by each day, unseeing in the fading twilight. What happens when the remnants of secrecy and experimentation linger long after official records say they don't exist? Sometimes a faint whisper of something. Sometimes the cracks of abandoned bunkers and battered shorelines. It beckons even the most doubtful among us to look. And maybe looking a little too closely is dangerous. This all happened near Camp Hero State Park in Montauk, New York, the old military base at the tip of Long Island that's famous for all sorts of conspiracy theories. People talk about the Montauk Project, about hidden tunnels, about experiments with time travel, mind control, you name it. I used to laugh it off as local lore, the kind of wild rumor that keeps tourists intrigued. But after my experience, I'm not so sure what's myth and what's terrifying reality. This started late one evening in August 2021. I was with a friend, he lives in Amagansett, and we decided to drive out to the Montauk Lighthouse around sunset, mostly because we wanted to see that classic view. We ended up sticking around after dark, which in hindsight might have been a bad idea. The place was mostly empty, except for a few fishermen along the shore. Everything felt normal until we heard a low mechanical hum coming from inland, like a generator or a substation powering on. There's that old radar tower in the park, so I assumed maybe they were running some maintenance routine. But then the hum turned into a throbbing vibration under my feet, as if the ground itself was gently pulsing. It was subtle, but definitely there. We walked toward the perimeter fence of the old base, looking for a source. My friend mumbled something about hearing rumors that the radar dish would sometimes spin on its own at odd hours. We didn't see anything move, but we both felt it, like a faint electricity in the air. I've been around large power stations before, but this was different. It felt alive, almost, if that makes sense. Later that same night, around 10 p.m., we decided we'd had enough weirdness and started making our way back to the car. That's when we noticed movement near one of the smaller, out-of-service bunkers. The place is off limits, with signs posted all over telling people to stay away. There was a shape in the dark, tall and thin but hunched forward. We stopped to watch. It seemed to glide along the chain-link fence, not quite an animal, not quite a person either. I couldn't make out any details except for a weird reflection in its eyes, or maybe from something on its head. It was too dark to be certain. We were about to call out when it disappeared behind a concrete corner. For a moment I told myself it was a deer or a trick of the shadows. But then the hum started again, louder this time, almost rhythmic. A moment later, a bright flash lit up behind the bunkers, like a sudden burst of white light that didn't make a sound. It was almost like lightning, except there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. And the flash didn't seem to come from above. It was more localized, like a strobe hidden in the depths of that old installation. We pretty much ran back to the car after that. My friend said something about, "It's just the old base acting up," like he'd heard stories from locals who claimed the government still runs covert experiments there. He repeated some anecdote about men in black suits patrolling the park at night. I tried to forget it, but the next day I found myself poking around for any news about unusual activity at Camp Hero. I got nothing official, but the usual rumors popped up on message boards: missing pets, sightings of bizarre creatures near the beach, sporadic power outages that no one at the local electric company would address. Over the following weeks, I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. I came back on my own late September, this time mid-afternoon. I wanted to see if anything looked out of place. A park ranger approached me and casually asked if I was looking for the tower. I said I was just a curious tourist. He nodded but didn't look convinced. He mentioned that certain sections of the park close early for public safety reasons, cliff erosion and all that. Yet he was eyeing me like I was about to stumble across something I shouldn't. When I asked about the radar tower being operational, he just said something about it being decommissioned and sealed, then walked off, leaving me more suspicious than reassured. Here's something else. I had a conversation with an older fisherman near Fort Pond Bay one morning after the initial incident. He recalled hearing about a local who vanished back in the 70s under mysterious circumstances, rumored to have been pulled in by something underground near Camp Hero. No formal record, no missing persons case that made headlines, just a story told among locals. There's always a possibility it's just an urban legend. But with everything else going on, it gnawed at me. A few weeks later, I visited my sister in Riverhead and mentioned my weird experiences in passing. She said that every so often people claim to see strange lights or silhouettes around the area of Montauk, usually late at night when the park is supposed to be closed. She heard from a co-worker that occasionally black SUVs with tinted windows show up with no insignia, no license plates. They glide around town, then vanish as quickly as they appear. I get that it all sounds so conspiratorial, but I can't ignore the humming, the flash of light, and that inhuman shape slinking near the bunker. It still haunts me. The rational part of me wants to believe we just spooked ourselves, or maybe came across some secret filming project or leftover technology tests. But I can't prove anything, and the official stance is always that Camp Hero is just another old base turned into a state park. Right. Anyway, that's the bulk of it. Maybe someone has experienced similar things, or they know someone with a story that lines up. I don't expect any definitive answers, but at least I'm not alone in wondering what's really going on inside those old bunkers. So, was it nothing more than an overactive mind nudged along by campfire stories? Or is the old Montauk base a relic of a past that refuses to stay buried? An echo of something still humming just beneath the surface of everyday life. Sometimes, a lonely stretch of highway hides more than the occasional hitchhiker or stray alligator. Every so often, a traveler stumbles onto something so startling, so unexplainable, it lingers in the mind like a fever dream, long after the headlights have faded. Listen closely, as this story will send chills down your spine. I've been debating for weeks whether to send this, because it still leaves me a bit shaken even just typing it out. But I figured your YouTube channel might at least appreciate hearing about the strange things that sometimes happen out here, where the pavement of the Tamiami Trail runs through the Everglades. This happened on December 5th, 2022, a Monday night that should have been uneventful. I'd driven down from Fort Myers to check out a property near Ochapee, Florida, a small place best known for having the smallest post office in the country. I'm a real estate photographer, so I had my camera gear with me, hoping to snag some daytime shots of the wetlands. The trip took longer than planned, though, thanks to some heavy traffic around Naples. By the time I reached that long, empty stretch of the Tamiami Trail, the sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a deep orange that faded fast into twilight. I stopped near a pull-off close to the Big Cypress National Preserve. It was around 7:30 p.m. when I got out of my car to stretch my legs. This is a place where the croaking frogs and the buzzing insects form a kind of eerie symphony. The air felt thick, and every breeze carried the scent of swamp. As I was standing there, I thought I saw something move in the distance, on the edge of my vision, a silhouette gliding low above the reeds. At first, I assumed it was a large heron or maybe an ibis, but it seemed too big. Not huge like a plane or anything, but bigger than any bird I know around here. I didn't think much of it until I heard a sound that I can only describe as a low, guttural whoosh. It made the hairs on my arms stand straight. I got back in the car, figuring I might be spooking myself. I started to drive east again, following the trail. There was only occasional traffic, a few headlights here and there, but mostly I felt alone. Maybe 10 minutes later, up ahead on the right side of the road, I caught a glimpse of what I thought was a man standing. Oddly tall, maybe 6 or 7 feet from what I could tell in the headlights. But there was something wrong with how it seemed to stand, as though it was hunched forward and balancing on the balls of its feet. Then, in the span of a second, it extended these enormous dark shapes from its sides. Wings, I guess. Before I had time to blink, it shot upward, crossing the road about 20 feet in front of my car. The entire thing happened so fast, yet in that flash, I swear I saw a kind of pale, leathery texture on the underside of those wings. I braked hard, my heart pounding. I sat there with the engine idling and the hazard lights on, trying to make sense of it. I've driven through the glades more times than I can count. And I've seen Florida panthers, snakes, all sorts of birds, but never anything remotely like that. I remember feeling this uneasy sense that I shouldn't linger. Like if I stayed too long, I'd see it again. And maybe I didn't want that. Eventually, I kept going. When I reached a small roadside convenience store near Monroe Station, or what's left of it, there's just a marker now, I pulled over to gather my wits. The place was closed, so I just stood by my car. A battered old pickup pulled in eventually, and this older gentleman waved politely, more out of courtesy than curiosity. He glanced at me, and I tried asking if he'd seen anything strange on the road tonight. He sort of smirked and mentioned that folks around here sometimes talk about sightings of big birds or bat-like shadows. He didn't elaborate, just said local stories go way back. He mentioned that sometimes men in official-looking uniforms show up, asking questions about sightings. That felt odd, and I got the sense he didn't want to discuss it too much. For the next few days, I couldn't stop replaying that moment in my head. I recalled reading about sightings of giant, winged humanoid creatures in other parts of the country. Some folks call them Mothman or winged weirdos, but I never heard of them specifically in the Everglades. But if you're going to hide something weird, the Everglades is a pretty good place. There's miles of swampy backcountry, peppered with old Native American legends of shape-shifting spirits and mysterious illusions. I started asking around quietly, but got nothing concrete. Some fishermen along the Turner River said they'd heard stories of something that could almost pass as a huge crane until you catch it at the right angle. Another claimed it was just local lore to scare off tourists, but I noticed a pattern. Whenever I pressed for details, folks would clam up or change the subject. It gave me that uneasy feeling that maybe there are more sightings out here than anyone lets on, and no one wants the trouble that comes with reporting it. I don't know if what I saw was some unknown species of bird, a freak one-time sighting, or something else entirely. The size, though, that's what bothers me the most. I've seen big birds, trust me. This was more than that. It moved with an almost human intelligence, like it knew I was there and decided it was time to vanish. The motion, the speed, it was unreal. I've driven through that route twice since, and every time I do, I feel a knot of anxiety. I find myself scanning the tree line, the roadside, half hoping I don't see anything like that again. Sometimes I wonder if I should have tried to film it, but in the moment, you freeze. You don't think logically about pulling out a phone or setting up a camera. You just react. Anyway, I know this sounds out there. I'm sending it in the hope someone else has had a similar experience or can offer some explanation. Or maybe folks who've had run-ins with winged humanoids in other parts of the country will see this and feel less alone. This place is full of secrets. Some are just bigger, darker, and more unsettling than the rest. Maybe it'll stir up some conversation or lead to some answers. Thanks for giving me a space to share. And so, on a lonesome highway in the Florida Everglades, one man glimpses something he can't quite name, a silent reminder that sometimes when the sun goes down, the shadows take wing and leave behind more questions than answers. My dear watchers, your presence is a gift. Thank you for your time, your curiosity, your courage. But remember, there are others who wander, unaware of the dangers that await. By liking this video and subscribing, you offer them a light in the darkness. Support our channel and keep the stories coming, simply by giving a thumbs up and subscribing and sharing.